He first of all intimated to me that the sheets of my atlas could not be carried out of France because the law permitted the exportation of books only. I then inquired whether books and sheets were suffered to be exported, and on receiving an answer in the affirmative, I observed that my sheets must be considered merely as unbound books. Monsieur de P then declared that the favor granted by the emperor could be extended only to booksellers and not to authors, but Mr. de Montalivet, the Minister of the Interior, objected to this partiality and silenced Mr. de P. The latter then asserted that the price of my sheets had been considerably increased, but it was proved by reference to 200 advertisements inserted in the journals during the last 10 years that the price had never varied. He next alluded to the intrinsic value of the work and affirmed that what I sold for 100 sous did not cost me more than 5 or 6, and started many other difficulties of an equally absurd kind. Meanwhile, time was flying. The ships were taking in the freights. The advantages offered by the owners were diminishing. The arbitrary valuations of the committees arrived, and I, who had persevered in my operations in spite of every difficulty, now found myself surrounded by 1,000 alarms and vexations. I thought myself happy in escaping absolute ruin and being able to recover my expenses, which exceeded 80,000 francs. But, said the emperor, this seems almost incredible. I can scarcely conceive how all this happened. Your speculation was exactly suited to my taste. It would have advanced you in my good opinion. I should have been delighted with your activity and the method of your details. Nothing afforded me greater pleasure than to enable those around me to make their fortunes by honest means. Why did you not appeal to me? Why did you not expose the conduct of P? You should have seen how I would have treated him. Sire, I replied, such an idea never entered my mind. The moment was critical. Your time is precious. How could I hope that your majesty would listen to me and that I could satisfactorily explain an affair so complicated and delicate? How could I convince you that I was the author of a work that bore the name of another? What would have been thought of one so near your majesty's person, meddling with commercial licenses and book-selling speculations? I felt that I was so little known to your majesty, and I dreaded the thought of the affair reaching your ear. Thus, though I was actively engaged in this affair, yet I exerted every endeavor to prevent its gaining publicity, and I made up my mind to suffer the worst. You were very wrong, said the emperor. You behaved rather oddly with me, and perhaps also with P. I cannot otherwise explain the unnatural malignity which he evinced towards you. The 16th. The breach between the governor and ourselves have been decided ever since the occurrence of what I have already set down as his first ill-natured trick, his first insult. Our reserve and mutual dislike increased every day. In short, we were on very bad terms with each other. He presented himself at Longwood about 3 o'clock, accompanied by his military secretary, and desired to see the emperor as he wished to speak with him on business. The emperor was rather unwell and was not yet dressed. However, he said he would see the governor as soon as he had finished dressing. In the course of a few minutes, he entered the drawing room, and I introduced Sir Hudson Lowe. As I was waiting in the antechamber with the military secretary, I could hear from the emperor's tone of voice that he was irritated, and the conversation was maintained with great warmth. The audience was a very long and a very clamorous one. On the governor's departure, I went to the garden whither the emperor had sent for me. He had not been well for the last 2 days. This affair completely upset him. Well, this cause, said he, on perceiving me, we have had one violent scene. I've been thrown quite out of temper. They have now set me worse than a jailer. Sir Hudson Lowe is a downright executioner. I received him today with my stormy countenance, my head inclined, my ears pricked up. We looked most furiously at each other. My anger must have been powerfully excited, for I felt the vibration in the calf of my left leg. This is always a sure sign with me, and I have not felt it for a long time before. The governor had opened the conversation with an air of embarrassment, and in broken sentences he said, some planks would have arrived. The newspapers must have made Napoleon acquainted with this circumstance. They were intended for the construction of a residence for him. He should be glad to know what he thought of it. To this the emperor replied only by a very significant look. Then, adverting hastily to other subjects, he told the governor with warmth that he asked for nothing, and that he would receive nothing at his hands, and that he merely desired to be left undisturbed. He added that though he had much cause to complain of the admiral, he had never had reason to think him totally destitute of feeling. That though he found fault with him, he had notwithstanding received him always in perfect confidence, but that during the month that Sir Hudson Lowe had been on the island, he experienced more causes of irritation than during the 6 preceding months. The governor, having observed that he did not come to receive a lesson, the emperor replied, "But that is no proof that you do not stand in need of one. You tell me, sir, that your instructions are much more rigid than those that were given to the admiral. Do they direct that I should suffer death by the sword or by poison? No act of atrocity would surprise me on the part of your ministers. If my death is determined on, execute your orders. I know not how you will administer the poison, but as for putting me to death by the sword, you've already found the means of doing that. If you should attempt, as you have threatened, to violate the sanctuary of my abode, I give you fair warning that the brave 53rd shall enter by trampling over my corpse." On hearing of your arrival, I congratulated myself in the hope of meeting with a general who, having spent some portion of his life on the continent and having taken part in important public affairs, would know how to act in a becoming way to me. But I was grossly deceived. The governor here said that as a soldier his conduct had been conformable with the interests and forms of his country, on which the emperor replied, "Your country, your government, and yourself will be overwhelmed with disgrace for your conduct towards me, and this disgrace will extend to your posterity. Was it ever an act of more refined cruelty than yours, sir, when a few days ago you invited me to your table under the title of General Bonaparte, with the view of rendering me an object of ridicule or amusement to your guests? Would you have proportioned the extent of your respect to the title you were pleased to give me? I am not General Bonaparte to you. It is not for you or anyone in the world to deprive me of dignities which are fairly my own. If Lady Loudon had been within my boundaries, I should undoubtedly have visited her, because I do not stand upon strict etiquette with a woman. But I should nevertheless have considered that I was conferring an honor upon her. I have been told that you propose that some of the officers of your staff should accompany me in my rides about the island instead of the officer established at Longwood. Sir, when soldiers have been christened by the fire of the battlefield, they all have one rank in my eyes. It is not the sight of any particular uniform that offends me here, but the obligation to see soldiers at all, since this must be regarded as a tacit concession of the point which I dispute. I am not a prisoner of war, and I cannot therefore submit to the regulations required in such a situation. I am placed by your power only by the most horrible breach of confidence." The governor, on taking leave, requested to be allowed to present his military secretary to the emperor, but the latter replied that that was very necessary, and that if the officer had any delicacy of feeling, he could not wish it. For his own part, he would rather decline it. He added that no social relationship should exist between jailers and prisoners, and that the presentation was therefore perfectly useless. He then dismissed the governor. The Grand Marshal joined us. He came from his own house, where the governor had alighted both before and after his visit to the emperor. He gave a detailed account of both his calls. He said that the governor, on his return, had shown great ill humor, and had complained very much of the emperor's temper. Not relying sufficiently on his own wit, he had recourse to that of the Abbé de Pratt, whose work had just passed through our hands. He said that Napoleon was not content with having created to himself an imaginary France, an imaginary Spain, and an imaginary Poland, but that he now wished to create an imaginary St. Helena. On hearing this, the emperor could not refrain from laughing. We then drove out in the calash, and on our return, the emperor took a bath. He sent for me, and giving directions that he would not dine till 9 o'clock. He kept me with him. He talked over the affairs of the day and dwelt on the abominable treatment he suffered, the atrocious malignity by which he was dictated, and the brutality by which it was executed. After a few moments of silence and reflection, he exclaimed, as he frequently does, "My dear Las Casas, they will kill me here, it is certain. What a horrible prophecy." He dismissed me at 17:30. I was very ill the whole of the night. The emperor breakfasted in the garden, sent for me to attend him there. He was himself dull and melancholy and was not well at all. After breakfast, we walked for a long time in the garden. He uttered not a word. The heat obliged him to return indoors about 10 o'clock. He regretted excessively the want of shade. About 4 o'clock, he sent to know how I was. He had just returned from taking a drive in the calash, in which I had not been able to join him. I walked with him and the Grand Marshal until 5:30. He still had a melancholy and abstracted air. He desired Bertrand to give us an account of his residence at Constantinople in 1796, his journey to Athens, and his return across Albania. A great deal was said relative to Selim III and his improvements. The Baron told. The conversation was very interesting, but unfortunately I find in my manuscript only a few imperfect lines, which my memory cannot assist me in filling up. After dinner, the emperor, who had scarcely eaten anything, attempted to read to us the sitting of the academy from Anacharsis. His voice and his whole frame had lost their wonted vigor and spirit. Contrary to his custom, he ended without analysis or observation. He retired to rest as soon as the chapter was concluded. The 18th, the emperor continued indisposed. On his return from a drive in the Kalash, he took a bath and sent for me. He evinced a gaiety of manner, and we conversed till 8:30. He ordered dinner in his own study, and he desired me to stay and dine with him. The place, the tete-a-tete, the elegance of the dinner service, and the neatness with which the table was laid out gave me, I said, an idea of comfort. The emperor smiled at my observation. He asked me many questions relative to London, my emigration, the French princes, and the Bishop of Arras. He himself recurred to the principal events of his consulship and gave me some curious details and anecdotes on these subjects. We then began to talk about the old and new courts of France. Many of the observations that were made would, if stated here, only be repetitions, for I believe I have mentioned them before. Other remarks that fell from the emperor, and which are merely hinted at in my manuscript, must remain forever lost. I will transcribe only the following particulars as now. I was entertaining the emperor with the anecdotes and ridiculous stories that were related gratuitously, no doubt, of Madame Lefebvre, who long enjoyed the privilege of furnishing the drawing rooms of Paris and even the drawing room of the Tuileries with a subject quizzing. I joined in the ridicule, said I, like everybody else, until one day I renounced it forever on hearing an anecdote which proved her nobleness and sentiments and goodness of heart. Madame Lefebvre, whose husband was once a private in the guards and who consequently filled a humble station in life, seemed to take pleasure in reviving the recollection of circumstances connected with her former station, and even in alluding to the laborious occupations which she had been obliged to pursue. During their poverty, she and her husband had been engaged in a domestic capacity in the family of the Marquis de Vallady, the captain of the corps in which Lefebvre served. The Marquis, who stood godfather to Lefebvre's child, played a conspicuous part in the desertion of the guards, nor was he less celebrated for his fanatical zeal in favor of Republican liberty, but he was nevertheless a man of generous sentiments. He was a member of the convention, and he perished because he opposed the execution of Louis XVI, publicly declaring that he considered it as absolute murder, adding that Louis had already been too unfortunate as a king to render the infliction of any additional punishment necessary. The wife of the Marquis, on her return to France after her emigration, immediately received the kindest offers and attentions from the family of Lefebvre, who were then living in a style of splendor and credit. One day, Madame Lefebvre called upon her, and in her usual strain of language said, "How little kindness and goodness of heart there is among you people of quality. We who have risen from the ranks know our duty better. We have just heard that Monsieur, one of our old officers and your husband's comrade, has returned from his emigration, and that he's dying for want. How shameful is this? We were fearful of offending him by offering him assistance, but the case is quite different with you. An act of service on your part will be gratifying to him. Pray give him this, as coming from yourself." With these words, she presented to her a rouleau of 100 louis, or 1,000 crowns. From that moment, sire, said I felt no inclination to join in the jokes against Madame Lefebvre. I no longer entertained towards her any other feeling than that of profound respect. I eagerly advanced to take her hand whenever I met her at the Tuileries, and I felt proud in escorting her through the drawing room, in spite of the sneers that were buzzing around me. We then related a number of traits of generosity exercised by the new favorites of fortune towards the old ruined families. Among others, we adverted to an instance of courtesy, perhaps somewhat far-fetched, in a certain individual who, being originally a private soldier, attained the rank of marshal or general-in-chief, I forget which. One day, during his newly acquired splendor, he assembled together at a family dinner his former colonel and 4 or 5 officers of the regiment, whom he received in his original uniform of a private, and he addressed his guests in the same terms which he had been in the habit of employing before he attained his elevated rank. And this, observed the emperor, was the only way to soften down the fury of the times, for such acts as these must necessarily have created mutual feelings of kindness between the opposite parties. and we may naturally suppose that during recent events the persons thus obliged will have returned the obligations they received were it only for the sake of being quit. This word quit reminds me of a characteristic trait of the emperor, which must be noticed here. A general had been guilty of irregularities in his department, which had they been brought before the military tribunals must have cost him his honor and perhaps his life. Now this general had rendered the most important services to Napoleon on the day of Brevet. The emperor sent for and reproached him with his misconduct. However, said he, you have laid me under obligations which I have not forgotten. I am perhaps about to transgress the laws, and to fail in my duty. I pardon you, sir. Begone! But know that from this day forward we are quit. Take care of yourself for the future. I shall look sharply after you. The 19th. Dr. Warden breakfasted with me today, the governor of Java, Sir Stamford Raffles, and his staff, who had touched at St. Helena on their way to Europe, arrived at Longwood. While we were at breakfast, Governor Raffles was well acquainted with all the Dutch gentlemen whom I had seen in 1810 during my mission to Amsterdam. The emperor told me that he would probably receive his visitors about 3 or 4 o'clock. In the meantime, I conversed for several hours with Dr. Warden, whom I furnished with some explanations on historical facts relating to the emperor, about which I suppose he intended to write. About 3 o'clock, the emperor received in the garden the English gentleman who had come from Java. He afterwards took a drive in the calash. On his return, about 6 o'clock, he desired me to follow him to his study. He sent for the Grand Marshal and his lady, and conversed familiarly until dinner time on various subjects relating to his family and his minutest domestic affairs during the period of his power. He dwelt particularly on the Empress Josephine. They lived together, he said, like a private citizen and his wife. They were the most affectionate and united, having for a long period occupied but one chamber and one bed. These are circumstances, said the emperor, which exercise great influence over the happiness of a family, securing the reputation of the wife and the confidence of the husband, and preserving union and good conduct on both sides. A married couple, continued he, may be said never to lose sight of one another when they pass in a night together, but otherwise they soon become estranged. Thus, as long as this practice was continued, none of my thoughts or actions escaped the notice of Josephine. She observed, seized, and comprehended everything. This circumstance was sometimes not altogether without its inconvenience to myself and to public affairs, but while we were at the camp of Bologna, a moment of ill humor put an end to this state of things. Certain political events which had occurred at Vienna, together with the report of the coalition which took place in 1805, had occupied the attention of the first consul throughout the whole of the day and a great part of the night. He retired to bed, not in very good spirits, and he found Josephine in a violent rage at his long absence. Jealousy was the real or pretended cause of this ill humor. Napoleon grew angry in his turn, threw off the yoke of subjection, and could never be brought to submit to it again. At the time of his second marriage, the emperor was fearful lest Maria Louisa might exact similar obedience, for in that case he must have yielded. But it is true, right, and a privilege of a wife, he observed. A sin by Josephine, continued the emperor, would have completed my happiness, not only in the political point of view, but as a source of domestic felicity. As a political result, it would have secured to me the possession of the throne. The French people would have been as much attached to the son of Josephine as they were to the king of Rome, and I should not have set my foot on an abyss covered with a bed of flowers. But how vain are all human calculations! Who can pretend to decide on what may lead to happiness or unhappiness in this life? Still, I cannot help believing that such a pledge of our union would have proved a source of domestic felicity. It would have put an end to the jealousy of Josephine, by which I was continually harassed, and which, after all, was the offspring of policy rather than of sentiment. Josephine despaired of having a child, and she in consequence looked forward with dread to the future. She was well aware that no marriage is perfect without children, and at the period of her second nuptials there was no longer any probability of her becoming a mother. In proportion as her fortune advanced, her alarm increased. She availed herself of every resource of medicine, and sometimes almost persuaded herself that her remedies had proved successful. When at length she was compelled to renounce all hope, she suggested to her husband the expediency of resorting to a great political deception, and she even went so far as directly to propose the adoption of such a measure. Josephine possessed in an eminent degree the taste for luxury, gaiety, and extravagance. natural to Creoles. It was impossible to regulate her expenditure. She was constantly in debt, and thus there was always a grand dispute when the day of payment arrived. She was frequently known to direct her tradesmen to send in only half their accounts. Even at the island of Elba, Josephine's bills came pouring in upon me from all parts of Italy. Someone who knew the Empress Josephine in Martinique communicated to the Emperor many particulars relative to her family and her youthful days. During her childhood, it was several times predicted that she would wear a crown. Another circumstance no less curious and remarkable is that the phial containing the holy oil used at the coronation of the kings of France is said to have been broken by Josephine's first husband, General Beauharnais, who, at a moment when the tide of popular favor was running against him, hoped by this means to reestablish his credit. 1,000 stories have been told and written respecting the marriage of Napoleon and Josephine. The campaigns of Italy explain the circumstances that first brought about their acquaintance and their union. After Vladimir Eugene, who was yet a child, presented himself to the General Bonaparte, then General-in-Chief of the Army of the Interior, to request that his father's sword might be restored to him. Le Memoirs, one of Napoleon's aides-de-camp, introduced the boy who, the moment he beheld his father's sword, burst into tears. The General-in-Chief was moved by this incident and loaded the child with caresses. When Eugene described the manners of the young general to his mother, she lost no time in introducing herself to him. It is well known, said the emperor, that she put faith in presentiments and prophecies. In her childhood, some fortune teller had predicted that she would attain splendid rank and would even ascend the throne. She, moreover, possessed a considerable share of art, and after we became acquainted, she frequently assured me that her heart beat when she first heard Eugene describe me, and that she then caught a glimpse of her future greatness and the accomplishment of the prophecies respecting her fate. Another peculiar shade in the character of Josephine, said the emperor, was her constant habit of negation. At all times, whatever question I put to her, her first movement was negative. Her first answer was no. And this no, continued the emperor, was not precisely a falsehood, but merely a precaution or defense. This, observed Madame Bertrand, is a characteristic distinction between your sex and ours. But after all, madame, resumed the emperor, this distinction arises only from the difference of education. You love, and you are taught to say no. No, we, on the contrary, take a pride in declaring that we love, whether we really do or not. This is the whole course of the opposite conduct of the two sexes. We are not, and never can be similar. During the reign of terror, said the emperor, Josephine was thrown into prison, while her husband perished on the scaffold. Her son Eugene was bound an apprentice to a joiner, which trade he actually learned. Hortense had no better prospects. She was, if I mistake not, sent to learn the business of a seamstress. Fouché was the first who ventured to touch upon the fatal strings of imperial divorce. He took upon himself, without any instructions, to advise Josephine to dissolve her marriage for the welfare of France. Napoleon, however, conceived that the proper moment had not yet arrived. The step taken by Fouché was a source of great vexation and trouble. It very much displeased the emperor, and if he did not dismiss Fouché at the earnest solicitation of Josephine, it was because he had himself secretly determined on the divorce, and he did not wish, by thus punishing his minister, to give any check to public opinion on the subject. However, it is but justice to observe that as soon as the emperor showed himself resolved on the divorce, Josephine consented to it. It cost her, it is true, a severe sacrifice, but she submitted without murmuring and without attempting to avail herself of those obstacles which she might, however uselessly have opposed to this measure. She conducted herself with the utmost grace and address. She desired that the viceroy might conduct the proceedings, and she herself made offers of service with regard to the House of Austria. Josephine would willingly have seen Maria Louisa. She frequently spoke of her with great interest, as well as of the young king of Rome. Maria Louisa, on her part, behaved wonderfully well to Eugene and Hortense, but she manifested the utmost deciding of a jealousy of Josephine. I wished one day to take her to Malmaison, said the emperor, but she burst into tears when I made the proposal. She said she did not object to my visiting Josephine, only that she did not wish to know it. But whenever she suspected my intention to go to Malmaison, there was no stratagem which she did not employ for the sake of annoying me. She never left me, and as these visits seemed to vex her exceedingly, I did violence to my own feelings, and scarcely ever went to Malmaison. Still, however, when I did happen to go, I was sure to encounter a flood of tears and a multitude of contrivances of every kind. Josephine always kept in view the example of the wife of Henry IV, who, as she observed, lived in Paris, visited the court, and attended the coronation after her divorce. But she remarked that her own situation was still preferable, for she already had children of her own, and could not hope to have more. Josephine possessed a perfect knowledge of all the different shades of the emperor's character, and she evinced the most exquisite tact in turning this knowledge to the best account. For example, said the emperor, she never solicited any favor for Eugene, or thanked me for any that I conferred on him. She never even showed any additional complaisance or assiduity at the moment when the greatest honors were lavished on him. Her grand aim was to prove that all this was my affair and not hers, and that it tended to my advantage. Doubtless, she entertained the idea that one day or other I would adopt Eugene as my successor. The emperor said he was well convinced that he was the individual whom Josephine loved best in all the world. And he added with a smile that he was sure she would have relinquished any assignation to attend him. She never failed to accompany him on all his journeys. Neither fatigue nor privation could deter her from following him. And she employed importunity and even artifice to gain her point. If I stepped in my carriage at midnight to set out on the longest journey, to my surprise I found Josephine already prepared, though I had no idea of her accompanying me. But I would say to her, you cannot possibly go. The journey is too long and will be too fatiguing for you. Not at all, Josephine would reply. Besides, I must set out instantly. Well, I'm quite ready, but you must take a great deal of luggage. Oh, no, everything's packed up. And I was generally obliged to yield. In a word, Josephine rendered her husband happy and constantly proved herself his sincerest friend. At all times and on all occasions, she manifested the most perfect submission and devotedness. And thus I shall never cease to remember her with tenderness and gratitude. Josephine, continued the emperor, ranked the qualities of submission, obedience, and complaisance in her sex on a level with political address, and she often condemned the conduct of her daughter Hortense and her relation Stephanie, who lived on very bad terms with their husbands, frequently indulging in caprice and pretending to assert their independence. Louis, said the emperor, had been spoiled by reading the works of Rousseau. He contrived to agree with his wife only for a few months. There were faults on both sides. On the one hand, Louis was too teasing in his temper, and on the other, Hortense was too volatile. They were attached to each other at the time of their marriage, which was agreeable to their mutual wishes. The union was, however, contrived by Josephine, who had her own views in promoting it. I, on the contrary, would rather have extended my connection with other families, and for a moment I had an idea of forming a union between Louis and a niece of Mr. de Talleyrand, who was afterwards Madame Juste de Noailles. The most ridiculous reports were circulated respecting improper intercourse between Napoleon and Hortense, and it was even affirmed that the latter had had a child by the emperor. Such a connection, said he, would have been wholly repugnant to my ideas, and those who knew anything about the morality of the Tuileries must be aware that I need not have been reduced to so unnatural and revolting a choice. Louis knew perfectly well the value to which these reports were entitled, but his vanity and irritability of temper were nevertheless offended by them, and he frequently alluded to them as a ground for reproaching his wife. But Hortense, continued the emperor, the virtuous, the genuine, the devoted Hortense, was not entirely faultless in her conduct towards her husband. This I must acknowledge, in spite of all the affection I bore her, and the sincere attachment which I am sure she entertained for me. Though Louis' whimsical humors were in all probability sufficiently teasing, yet he loved Hortense. And in such a case, a woman should learn to subdue her own temper and endeavor to return her husband's attachment. Had she acted in the way most conducive to her interests, she might have avoided her late lawsuit, secured happiness to herself, and followed her husband to Holland. Louis would not then have fled from Amsterdam, and I should not have been compelled to unite his kingdom to mine, a measure which contributed to ruin my credit in Europe. Many other events might also have taken a different turn. The Princess of Baden, continued the emperor, pursued a wiser course. On witnessing Josephine's divorce, she recollected her own situation and used every endeavor to gain her husband's affections. They were afterwards a most happy couple. Pauline was too careless and extravagant. She might have been immensely rich, considering all that I gave her, but she gave away all in her turn. Her mother frequently lectured her on this subject and told her that she would die in some house of charity. Madame, however, carried her parsimony to a most ridiculous extreme. I offered to furnish her with a very considerable monthly income on condition that she would spend it. She, on the other hand, was very willing to receive the money, provided she were permitted to hoard it up. This arose not so much from covetousness as excessive foresight. All her fear was that she might one day be reduced to beggary. She had known the horrors of want, and they now constantly haunted her imagination. It is, however, but just to acknowledge that she gave a great deal to her children in secret. She is indeed a kind mother. Nevertheless, continued the emperor, this woman who was so reluctant to part with a single crown would willingly have given me her all on my return from the island of Elba, and after the battle of Waterloo she would have surrendered to me all she possessed in the world to assist me in reestablishing my affairs. This she offered to do, and would without a murmur have doomed herself to live on broad bread. Loftiness of sentiment still reigned paramount in her heart. Pride and noble ambition were not yet subdued by avarice. Here the emperor observed that he had still present in his memory the lessons of pride which he had received from his mother in his childhood, and which had influenced his conduct through life. The naturally powerful mind of Madame Mère had been exalted by the great events of which she had been a witness. She had seen 5 or 6 revolutions, and her house had been thrice burnt to the ground by factions in Corsica. Joseph, said the emperor, rendered me no assistance, but he was a very good man. His wife, Queen Julia, is the most amiable creature that ever existed. Joseph and I were always attached to each other and kept on very good terms. He loves me sincerely, and I doubt not that he would do everything in the world to serve me, but his qualities are only suited to private life. He is of a gentle and kind disposition, possesses talent, information, and is altogether a very amiable man. In the discharge of the high duties which I confided to him, he did the best he could. His intentions were good, and therefore the principal fault rested not so much with him as with me, who raised him above his proper sphere. When placed in important circumstances, he found his strength unequal to the task imposed on him. The Queen of Naples had chiefly formed herself amidst great events. She had solid sense, strength of character, and boundless ambition. She must naturally suffer severely from her reverses, more particularly as she may be said to have been not born a queen. She had not, like the rest of us, observed the emperor, moved into the sphere of private life. Caroline, Pauline, and Jerome were still in their childhood when I had attained supreme rank in France. Thus they never knew any other estate than that which they enjoyed during the period of my power. Jerome was an absolute prodigal. He plunged into boundless extravagance and the most odious libertinism. His excuse, perhaps, may be his youth and the temptations by which he was surrounded. On my return from the Isle of Elba, he appeared to be much improved and to afford great promise. One remarkable testimony in his favor was the love with which he had inspired his wife, whose conduct was admirable, when after my fall her father, the despotic and harsh King of Württemberg, wished to procure her divorce. The princess then, with her own hands, honorably inscribed her name in history. To our great regret, dinner was announced, but the emperor continued to be very talkative during the whole of the evening. He took a familiar retrospect of various subjects, principally alluding to the conduct of his many persons of note during his absence, and at the time of his return, he did not return till midnight, and he closed the evening's conversation with the following words: "What is doing at this moment in France and in Paris? And what shall we ourselves be doing on this day 12th month?"